Welcome to Finding History. In this episode, we will embark on a riveting adventure through the Industrial Revolution and discover more about how this turning point in history relates to revolution, reaction, and reform. Stay tuned to learn more about this engrossing time while we have fun along the way. The Industrial Revolution, a pioneering time period that occurred in Britain from the mid-1700s to mid-1800s, when there was an influx on machine-made goods, which sparked change all over the world. Machines began to dominate the world and prompted people to lead their lifestyles differently. As workplace operations drastically changed when industries converted from man to machine labor for increased profit margins, efficiency, and product production, people had to adapt to new means of carrying out work. This important period improved the quality of life and prompted the world to become a more advanced place. Humans were initially nomads and survived solely on hunting and gathering. How did society transition from such a primitive, prehistoric way of life to the age of the iPhone? Well, over time these nomads began to settle and started farming. While this was a significant transition from a life based off of shooting wild animals for food and moving to new locations when natural resources were exhausted, early farming was not very efficient and still had much room to improve. Rather than traveling in quest of food, people settled on fertile lands near riverbeds and worked seasonally, for example, during times of harvest. Communities were created and a sense of order began to develop. During the agricultural revolution, the field of farming was drastically changed. New inventions to make farming more methodical surfaced. As the new food supply increased and society boomed and prospered with the implementation of these new inventions, many farmers used to the methods of early farming were left without a job. This led to the Industrial Revolution. Farmers became factory workers and machines began to dominate the world. The Industrial Revolution pioneered the concept of working throughout the year rather than seasonally with farming, and allowed people to settle everywhere as non-fertile lands could be inhabited in this new society. Britain in the 1700s was a rural area that mostly consisted of farms. As rich landowners purchased much land and transformed the farming industry with better ways to produce crops, the food supply escalated in quantity and quality. Britain's growing population, which was increasing at an alarmingly fast rate, demanded a large supply of food. Big fields or enclosures were created, as rich landowners closed off the areas of land they purchased from farmers with fences. Enclosures were used for trials to develop methods for more efficient farming. As landowners experimented and started producing more crops with the implementation of advanced farming methods, the Enclosure Acts were passed. Society was booming and more food led to a bigger population. The Enclosure Acts in Great Britain stated that wealthy landowners had the right to create enclosures from public fields. With new technology and techniques emerging in the farming field as farms became privately owned property, many farmers were soon left without a job and sought work in the city. Factories were prevalent in the city, and many farmers became factory workers, thereby contributing to the Industrial Revolution. Many may be wondering how any of this started in Britain in the first place. There were many factors that contributed to the part of industrialization. During the early 1700s, the agricultural revolution took place. With more food, people could feed themselves at a lower price and society thrived. With a bigger population, there was more demand for goods. Farmers were forced to move from rural to urban areas to pursue new work due to the Enclosure Acts. Financial institutions, private property laws, and Britain's colonial empire were established and allowed the construction of factories. The creation of new inventions is what truly spurred industrialization. Britain had an abundance of natural resources and all factors of production necessary to industrialize land, labor, and capital, making it the perfect place for the Industrial Revolution to originate from. Britain catered to the needs of the entire world for cotton, wool, and linen. The agricultural revolution caused a larger food supply and thriving society, as there were superior living circumstances. This brought about a larger population and, in turn, a greater demand for clothing. During the Industrial Revolution, the textile industry was the first trade to be reformed. New technology and inventions emerged to make the production of cloth more efficient, and the textile industry resultantly thrived and made lots of money. In 1733, John Kay invented the flying shuttle. The flying shuttle was revolutionary with its ability to bring yarn to the working in a very short time span. With the invention of the flying shuttle, other inventions followed. The spinning jenny, invented by James Hargreaves, became the next revolutionary invention, with its capability to simultaneously work 8 threads. These two inventions were operated by hand and very tiring to work. Around 1769, Richard Arkwright invented the water frame, which used water power to propel spinning wheels. By utilizing water power, production increased even further until Samuel Crompton assembled the two revolutionary technologies of the spinning jenny and water frame into a single machine, the spinning mule, in 1779. Soon after, Edmund Cartwright invented the power loom, also run by water power, to further increase the speed of weaving in 1787. While all of these breakthroughs were occurring in Britain, the United States also made technological advances to improve the textile industry. With the rising production of the textile industry, the producers of the cotton needed to keep up with the growing industry. The gap was bridged with Eli Whitney's invention of the cotton gin, which made the production of cotton much more efficient. Now, Britain's textile industry had a greater supply of cotton to work with, which was much needed, as the new innovations significantly sped up the manufacturing of cloth. The textile industry was completely reformed with the introduction of advanced technologies and inventions. Cloth increased in quantity and quality. With the changes made during the Industrial Revolution, workers did not have to slowly spin cloth by hand in houses anymore. The textile industry was industrialized and became factory and machine-based. With the booming textile industry, people were searching for a new source of cheap energy in the transportation field. Coke, also known as coal, was one of the most cheap power sources. It wasn't until 1765 when mathematical instrument maker James Watt altered the steam engine to make it faster, more fuel efficient, and work more efficiently. The Industrial Revolution set forth great transformations, one in which is the changes in transportation that most people would not be able to live without today. And by this, I mean the creation of engines. The first steam engines started off as being inefficient when it came to fuel usage. These engines were extremely expensive to run. The modification of the steam engine, done by James Watt, allowed for the expansion of the use of engines. It first started off as a method of draining deep mines, but as time went on, it was used to run boats, machines, and eventually railroads. The demand for coal greatly increased during the Industrial Revolution, as the use of the steam engine skyrocketed. This new and improved efficient steam engine, developed by James Watt, revolutionized the transportation industry and gave birth to new methods of transportation, as it led Robert Fulton to create the first commercially successful steamboat. The success of Robert Fulton's steamboat led way to the creation of man-made waterways and the use of engines for transportation. Efficient water transportation emerged and paved the route for the transport of goods to places all around the world. World trade soared as systems of canals and the steam engine developed. Macadam roads, or roads enhanced with the addition of strategic stones and rock, were invented by John McAdam and enabled much better wagon transport. The turnpike industry surfaced during this time as companies that enforced tolls formed. Goods produced in new factories now had the means to reach places and be transported. In 1804, Richard Trevithick invented the first locomotive to transport iron, which was encouraged by a bet. Soon after, engineers such as George Stephenson, who built multiple engines, modified the locomotive. George Stephenson soon began working on the first railroad in 1821. The first railroad was an immediate success, as it was efficient in speed, power, and capability. Many railroads followed, connecting ports, mines, and cities alike. Upon completion, railroads became the primary method of cheap, successful transportation, with speed up to 24 miles per hour, which was fast for their time, and created a new industry of work. Transport was made easier and efficient for people and products during the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution created a drastic change in how lives were led. While new technology greatly improved the quality of life, this revolutionary period in time proved to be a true blessing and a curse for people. The swift rate at which industrialization progressed was astonishing. As life changed from operating and revolving around farms to machines, several aspects of life were influenced. The Industrial Revolution allowed for higher wages to be earned in factories rather than farms. People could afford better food, means to warm houses and clothing. Life transformed from farming on rural areas to people inhabiting European industrial cities. As society became industrialized and urbanized, the population greatly increased. Industrialization led society to become heavily divided into distinct classes. The middle class emerged, and there were extremes in the upper and lower spectrums of people. Rich factory owners prospered and created upper middle class, while working class of poor laborers had despicable living conditions. Everyone fled to cities to pursue the many jobs created during the industrialization period. Unfortunately, because these cities grew rapidly, they had no plans for sanitization and building codes. These cities did not have sufficient schooling, housing, and enforcement. Workers lived in the dark, dirty shelters with entire families living in the same room. Deadly, lethal diseases spread quickly and affected many. At the same time, the wealthy lived lavishly. Ultimately, the standard of living increased during this time. Child labor became very prevalent with the rise of many factories. Children were severely mistreated and had to carry out taxing work for long hours. Pollution also skyrocketed during this time, as life was completely dependent on machines now. Overall, the Industrial Revolution changed lifestyles by harboring technological advances and created effects that had a lasting impact. While industrialization originated in Great Britain, it soon made its way to different regions around the world. The United States was impacted by the Industrial Revolution, as it also had many natural and labor resources needed to industrialize, like Great Britain. The textile industry in the United States was soon revolutionized, as spinning machines surfaced. An abundance of natural resources, inventions, and people led to an upsurge of technology. Continental Europe was also hit by the Industrial Revolution, as life became machine-based. Over time, the entire world became industrialized and followed the original example that Britain had set. While industrialization had many positive effects, imperialism was a negative effect, where large industrialized countries started colonizing poor agricultural nations for natural resources, as industrialization warrants the use of these resources. Industrialized nations were plagued with many problems. The age of the Industrial Revolution led to economic, social, and political reforms, as people tried to better industrialize society. The Industrial Revolution created a large divide between the rich and poor. Business leaders thought that the government should not interfere in working conditions. The ideas of laissez-faire and capitalism came about from this belief. Supporters of laissez-faire did not believe in government attempts to aid the poor laborers. The ideas of utilitarianism and socialism arose from reformers who thought that the government should help better the despicable working conditions that the poor faced. Labor unions were created as workers voiced their views regarding how they deserved more rights, and they held strikes in opposition to unfair working conditions. Laws were created to improve the mistreatments of industrialization. Strides towards the abolishment of slavery and equal rights for women were made. Ideas of public education and prison reform also surfaced. The route towards democracy continued in industrialized countries. The agricultural revolution predated the Industrial Revolution and created a large population and greater demand for goods with an increase of food. The Industrial Revolution pioneered the concept of working throughout the year rather than seasonally with farming and allowed people to settle everywhere, as non-fertile lands could be inhabited in this new society. The revolutionary period in this time originated in Great Britain in the 1760s, when life became dependent on machines. Work was done cheaper and faster with the introduction of new inventions that revolutionized the textile and transportation industries. Factories became prevalent. Lifestyles and work changed drastically as life began to revolve around machines rather than farms. Laborers had a better standard of living than in the agricultural area, but were forced to work in worse conditions. Better transportation of goods and people led to the fast spread of industrialization throughout the world, as resources could be gathered and used to serve the needs of a growing population. Society became divided into classes, with the very rich, middle class, and poor laborers. As fuel and clothing were industrialized, they became more affordable. Industrialization had many positive effects on society and made a lasting impact. The Industrial Revolution created the basis for how our society operates today and led to the technological revolution.